Hi and welcome to At The Wheel. This is another video of me working on my cars, my partner's car I suppose. Last week I was replacing these suspensions of strut mounts, the shock mounts up at the top, at the front. Those were, especially the driver's side, very severely perished and in need of replacing. But for good maintenance I also replaced the passenger side one, and when doing that I noticed that the CV boot, the axle boot on the inner side, on the passenger left hand side, was leaking or sort of cut almost right around the front seal, around the actual shaft itself, and leaking a load of its grease, its lubricant out, and it was spraying it all around the engine bay, which is not ideal, and also means that if there's no lube left in that joint, then that CV joint is going to fail very soon. So it's something we want to get repaired and replaced as soon as possible. So I have a new CV boot kit, and what I'm going to be doing is basically just taking the CV boot and axle out. I'm not taking the stub that goes into the gearbox out, that's staying in the car and the gearbox. I'm just taking the actual axle itself out, CV joint included, replacing the CV boot that's on that sort of inner side, and then sticking it all back together. I'm hoping to sort of cheat things a little bit by removing the anti-roll bar linkage and then just the three mounts, three nuts on the top that hold that strut mount in that I replaced last week, because I'm hoping that will give me enough room to maneuver effectively the whole hub assembly to be able to get the drive shaft out. Failing that, I might need to take the tie rod end off, but I'm severely hoping that I don't need to do that because yeah, it looks very crusty and difficult, so I'm hoping I don't need to do that, but we'll see how we go. Let's get the car in the air and well, yeah, see how we go. You're going to be on the chest mount again this week. Hope that's all right. Hope you get to see as much as possible, but yeah, let's go. I'm so glad that I did all these wheels up to torque, knowing that the car wouldn't move until I'm done with this. Oh, aren't I clever? I'm gonna keep the jack there just for now until I get the wheels off, and then I can put the wheel under, and then I can feel just a touch safer. I'm not actually going to be under the car, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem, but I'd rather not die, especially because I'm on my own here. Right, so what we're replacing is this in here. It might be a bit dark, my apologies. We need to get this nut off, which means that I need to turn this wheel so that this tie rod end is out of the way. Most people would remove this tie rod end nut to get it off, but I'm hoping I don't need to because this is crusty and I currently don't have a replacement for it. So I would definitely need to replace that if I take it off, but let's see, shall we? Oh, I slipped. Almost there. Like that. Right, now this axle nut has been pinned into position, which is perfectly normal. It stops it from ever accidentally backing out. Like, even though this gets torqued to 180 Newton meters, which is insane. It also, just for extra safety, you knock that last little bit in, and then no matter how loose this ends up being for whatever reason, which is normally not very, but just in case this gets knocked in, and that just clamps it down and it won't back out on its own, even if the actual tension were to go away. It's a nice little feature. I'm just putting the bolts in so that I can twist the axle around a little bit easier than trying, especially because there isn't any, there's no screw in here as of yet. That's something that I'm hoping to repair today as well, but just get that out so that I can little punch and pop that out, or actually I might even just pry bar it out to start with if I get the small one, or even a flathead screwdriver because it's quite small and thin in there. Yeah, I think I'll start with that. I have a stool that I was using as a seat. Let's do that because I have arthritis in every joint of my body and this is already killing me, so best not make it hurt more than it needs to. That's just chipping and rounding it. Nice. Okay, that's not working. I think punch it shall be then. Right, looks pretty decent. See if I can fit this medium one in here. I can. Okay, right. Now this, as far as I'm aware, is a 36mm socket, which is technically not one I have an impact for, I don't think. A 32mm socket, sorry. But I do have a collection of 32mm sockets, including one in the other kit that I don't think I brought out. Oh no, I brought the whole kit out, that was it. That is a 6-sided 32mm. So let's see if this fits. Fits with a little bit of slop actually, but I don't think that a 30 will fit. No. What is... So I have a 32 and I have a 1 1/4 inch because fractions are definitely totally better. Interesting, so the 1 1/4 inch actually fits slightly better than the 32. However, the 32 I have, the 1 1/4 and the other 32 I have are both 12 points, whereas this is a 6 point, which I would prefer, especially if I'm going to try impacting, and I also don't care about this one as much, so I'm going to try this one first and see where we get to. And I'm hoping that this impact is enough for this. Well, my ears are ringing, and no, that's not moved at all. Wonderful. The socket's nice and hot. In fact, the socket's nice and chafed too. That's great. Oh well. Alright, it's time to order some help. Hey. I cannot believe that worked. It never works. Literally never. Cannot believe that worked. Cool. That's that. Excellent. So what proceeded was a lot of failed attempts to do pretty much anything. The driveshaft wasn't stuck in the splines. It would move sort of forward and backwards relatively freely, which is great, but my attempts to just drop the suspension, sort of the strut mount nuts, and then cantilever the suspension over enough to get the driveshaft out was a bit of a far-fetched idea, unfortunately. And so I tried removing the lower ball joint. Specifically, the lower ball joint is a sort of separate component that's not, in theory anyway, actually pressed into the knuckle. It's bolted into the knuckle with two little bolts. And so I removed those and tried to get the lower ball joint to just pop out, and that would give me enough room. But unfortunately, it's just so rusty and crusty in here that I had absolutely no chance, no hope, no luck, no nothing. So yeah, I'm still at the same point that I was literally a couple hours ago. The boot is still leaking. I don't know how well you'll be able to see that, but it is. The anti-roll bar link is off, and nothing else is. Like, I can undo the top mount up there, and that will let me move this around and stuff, which is helpful, but it doesn't solve the problem of me not being able to get this out far enough. If I took the spring off, I think I'd be fine, but I really can't be bothered to take the spring off again. That was very painful. So what I'm going to try now is actually undoing the bottom ball joint. I'm not sure if that will even come off anyway, but, well, I don't really have any other options at the moment. I really don't want to take the tie rod end off, and even if I do take the tie rod end off, I think even with the play up the top, I won't have enough room down at the bottom to swing it out to get this actually like out of its carrier. So yeah, I'm gonna go with trying to impact this one off, which I believe is an 18mm socket, which I had to go and get my other socket set for, because of course the one socket you need is the one socket you don't have, or your main set doesn't have, whatever. Right, here goes nothing. Oh, good. And of course it's stuck in. Well, since the nut's stuck onto the socket, I may as well hit them both. That's not going to work. So sorry for the jump cut, but unfortunately I got into just a bit too much pain, and it also got incredibly sort of dark and late, and so I filmed some more sort of specific clips rather than just everything on the chest mount GoPro. But as you can see, you can very clearly see the problem that we're trying to address. I did end up getting the drive shaft out, as you can tell, by taking the spring off, and you'll love my fantastically janky solution for holding the suspension assembly in place. But basically, I just removed the nut from the top of the sort of strut mount, which lets you take the spring off, and then that gives you plenty, or at least just about enough room to get sort of cantilever the whole knuckle and shock absorber over to then slide it out. In terms of the process for removing the drive shaft itself, that's relatively easy. You just need to cut that rear sort of clamp, if you like. I honestly have no idea how this one was put on, as it feels like a perfectly continuous solid piece of steel, but you can just cut it off carefully, and that reveals the actual drive shaft itself. The inner bearing side is almost always something like this. It is actually fully loose, as in, technically speaking, the boot is the only thing that's really holding it in, as well as obviously the geometry not letting the suspension, letting it just fall out or anything. But all it is these three roller bearings that sit inside a cup. And that allows it to move both up and down, obviously spin round and provide torque to the wheels while spinning around, but also to move in and out as the suspension geometry changes. These 3 roller bearings are on a little sort of spline shaft on a bearing carrier, and that's retained by mostly, pressure, but it does also have a circlip up at the top that you will need to remove to be able to get this off, to get the old boot off and the new boot on. But these bearings, like I said, they just sit inside this sort of triangular cup, and that allows them to move forward and backwards as the suspension geometry moves up and down, and obviously the angle changes, and therefore the distance changes. And it's quite an interesting design. As you can see, obviously the grease is very much sort of treacly. That's because moisture has got in and obviously contaminated it, if you like. Luckily, the bearings themselves all look in very good condition, so I think we got to this nice and early enough that the drive shaft and these bearings don't need replacing, which I'm very happy about. It's, both from a cost perspective and just a kind of waste perspective. There's no point throwing away perfectly good stuff. But to remove that, you need to remove the spring clip and then gently sort of basically hammer or tap on the back of the carrier itself, not the bearings, the carrier, so that it slides off of its splined shaft. It is actually sort of chamfered on the rear edge, the edge that you're looking at, whereas the front edge is more flush cut. So when you go to put it back on, do make sure you put it on the right way round. But you just gently use a punch or a drift, whatever else, to just gently knock it off on all sides. And then you can slide the old boot off and make sure to give everything a very, very good clean. I use some brake cleaner and some sort of kitchen towel, shop towels type thing to make sure that everything is nice and sort of clean, free from all of that old grease, free from contaminants, dirt, and all that sort of stuff. We want to make sure that we're putting this back in as pristine condition as possible, so that we don't damage the bearing or do any added harm to the bearings to make them sort of last as long as possible. But once you've got it all cleaned out, you can then slide the new boot onto the shaft. Make sure to add the new clip on as well. They do technically open up, so you can, if you do happen to forget that clip, you can put it on afterwards, but it's generally better if you pre-apply that. When you slide it on, obviously make sure it goes on the right way. It sits in a little sort of groove, and to crimp that clamp down, you're meant to use a special tool. I ended up using, I can't remember what the specific name is, but they're sort of like side cutters, but with a flat end. They sort of clamp down more like pliers than they do sort of front ways, if you like. So that ended up working just fine, although if you do have the special tool, that's also recommended. Then you can hammer the new the bearing carrier back on. Specifically, use a socket that is the sort of the internal diameter is slightly larger than the shaft itself, but the external diameter is the same size as the bearing carrier, so that you're not resting on the bearings surfaces themselves. But once you hammer it back down and you put the circlip back in, you can then use the included tube of moly or molybdenum, I think it's molybdenum disulfide grease, but moly grease to both coat the actual bearings themselves, get them nice and covered, and maybe even use your ideally gloved hands to work the grease into the bearings. And you can also fill up the cup itself with any excess that you can't reasonably fit on the bearings themselves. Then you can slide it back in, and then you need to do up the rear clip. And this was quite possibly and weirdly the most difficult part of the whole process, because I think it's called an earless clamp or something like that, but basically there's nowhere for you to grab onto with this, at least nowhere obvious, and there's no easy way for you to effectively clamp it down enough to then get it in the proper secured position. Again, as always, there is a special tool you can and should use, but the tool that I ended up using that ended up working incredibly well is actually just a pair of standard vice grips. I was just about able to grab onto the two sort of faces that let you close the clamp up and then sort of secure it down. I locked the vice grips in place and then used a little pick to flatten the sort of tang, if you like, of the clamp down onto the two teeth that hold it locked in place. And once I managed that, that was it for me for the night, because I was in just far too much pain, and so we ended up leaving it in a sort of very dismantled but at least secure state until the next day. But here you can see the new clamp in place and the new boot in place as well. It's also worth mentioning, actually, that smaller seal, the one that seals around the drive shaft itself, make sure that the clamp is not sort of sticking up, especially on the back side, the boot side, so that it doesn't end up ripping the boot open. That's a sort of pretty common failure point for these types of clips. It's actually how the original one failed, and it's so you need to make sure that it's nice and smooth. It's not sort of sharp on that rear edge, the side where that drive shaft boot is actually like folding over onto it, just so that you don't end up having it rip itself apart as well. When it came to the next day, we actually ended up buying a spring compressor, which was a great help to get everything back on. Although unfortunately, because the Mini spring is so small, we ended up only being able to get the spring compressor on the full height on one side, but only on two of the sort of three steps or rings, if you like, on the other side. And so while the spring compressor undoubtedly helped a whole lot, we ended up using a mix of both the spring compressor and jacking the car up to be able to, and actually quite a lot of brute force, to be able to get the nut on the shock absorber shaft. Once that was threaded on, we used the shock absorber shaft and that nut to effectively drive the whole thing, the whole system together and clamp it all down, which was much easier once we had it all in place. And then obviously we tightened everything back up as you should. We had the sort of top nut torqued back up, which if I remember rightly, I think was around 81 or 84 Newton meters, I think, give or take, or was it 60? Anyway, that kind of torque, if you like. And then also obviously the anti-roll bar linkage, which I disconnected, and those three nuts that go on the top of the shock mount, or the sort of rubber strut mount, to hold that in place as well. And then that was kind of it. Of course, obviously the job to put the wheel back on and get it all sorted. But once that was in place, the other key thing is actually hammering down the drive shaft nut and tightening that back up to spec as well, which I think is about 180 or so Newton meters, so a fair bit. But once that was tightened, you then use a hammer and punch to drive that little sort of edge into the drive shaft so it can't back itself out again, and then just stick the wheel back on and get it all tightened. So that is the drive shaft boot installed. It was a massive pain, especially because I didn't have the proper tools for all of the clamps, and I've never used a couple of those different types of clamps before. Also, I tried to do it what I thought was the easy way, ended up being the hard way. That's kind of how I end up doing things. I also had to leave, it took, like, technically speaking 4 days. This is the fourth day from me starting it, and that's because a mix of work. I couldn't do anything yesterday. I was also in very much pain yesterday, and the second reason is that I'm what you call partially disabled, and so especially in the end of I think it was Saturday, I was absolute agony, so had to leave it in pieces and come back the next day with a friend. And a spring compressor, which I now have, which is going to be useful for future things, I'm sure. But yeah, that's the process. If you manage to get anything interesting or useful out of this, feel free to let me know in the comments. Otherwise, that is both it for this video. And actually for this year, I have a load of stuff hopefully in the works for next year, especially as I turn 25, which is the year or the age limit for a lot of the manufacturers' press fleet cars, as their insurance doesn't let anyone under 25 drive them, even though I have a lot of driving experience for someone who's not 25. Anyway, hopefully that will mean that I'll have some, cars into review in the coming probably months. I'm kind of sort of struggling to keep up with a lot of things. I'm spinning a lot of plates at the moment, so bear with me. But yeah, that's kind of it really. I hope you have a great Christmas if you're watching this when it goes up, or if you're watching it just after, then have a great New Year's, and otherwise, well, have a great day. I'll catch you guys in the new year. Of course, as always, you can hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and the bell notification icon. There's also plenty of other videos on the end cards. I'm not sure which way around they'll be today, so go check those out if you're interested and you want to keep watching. And yeah, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.